dance going on.
Darren Rose Radio, Otis, Adela, and Christine, who I will formally introduce here in a moment. This is our final episode of the 2014 inaugural Darren Rose Radio season. Thanks for checking out one or all of the shows. Of course, DarrenRoseRadio.com is where you can find all that. At Darren Rose is the social handles on Twitter, Instagram, and this is going to be the final show. So next year when we come back, I'm going to actually have more content, a couple new shows, also playing some music, some really cool stuff. So thanks again for being part of the program. Now, hanging out today is a promotions veteran. She spent 20 years in the major label system. Island Def Jam, also Columbia.
Columbia before that. Before Columbia was Mercury, when it was Mercury Def Jam under Polygram.
There you go. That's probably just a portion of the resume of Christine Chia. Thank you.
Otherwise known as Chia.
Chia, yeah. There's a ton of music stuff we're going to talk about. But I just realized, with all due respect to Zach Galifianakis, by the way, I'm not biting his Between Two Ferns. This is actually...
what do you call that plant? It's like a Hawaiian...
Brumelia. I think this is a brumelia. It's
That's
like
the name of the new show.
It's the only it's the only green and red thing I have for the holidays. And we usually do these outside.
Let's put an ornament. And I brought the sunshine today.
I know you totally did. And
it's beautiful outside.
We had here in SoCal crazy rain over the last few days, so that's why we're inside. I know,
rain.
Right?
It's just called rain.
Yeah, and now it's still
regular
wet.
Rain.
It's a mess. But first, I want to talk about a new addition to your life this year. Your young baby that you adopted.
Baby Juliet. Yes. I don't know how far in my history we're going to get, but basically...
because the first thing I want to ask you is, when did you first, your husband, Tony, and you decide that we're going to adopt?
We got married 3 years ago and wanted to start a family. I'm, a little bit older than probably the ideal time, even though I don't look it. Just kidding. But
22, you got
found out exactly. Found out, had some issues. So we got approved for adoption last year, around October, and then we've been sort of waiting. It's a crazy process, adoption.
Well, let's talk about that. What do you kind of step by step? What do you have to do? Because I've always been fascinated by it. We've seen Juno. I can imagine
nothing like Juno. Zero. In fact, our social worker said, "Hey, you've seen the movie Juno?" I'm like, "Yeah." She goes, "It's not like that. 99% are not like that. They're not. They're
It's stressful and emotional.
Well, and a lot of them, it's women or girls in a really, really tough predicament. It's not easy to, give up your child. A lot of them, it's, financial. For financial reasons, they can't keep the baby, or they have too many kids, or, it definitely, I don't know. It's definitely women so far that in our experience, that don't have a lot of family support. Unlike Juno, it was like, her parents.
Sure.
They're just kind of doing it on their own or with the, boyfriend or husband or whatever. So the first thing you do is basically you have to do it's called a house study.
And was there like an agency that you go through, or are there a lot
There's
of different?
So many different options you could do.
Did you guys just Google, or were you referred to one?
We got referred to one in Los Angeles, and we decided, here's the thing. We always thought if we were able to have a child of our own, we were always going to adopt a second child.
Okay.
Always. Huh. So that's just,
that's something. So it's
we're
always
we rescue dogs. We were like, it doesn't need to be ours.
Rescue a child.
Yeah. I mean, that's just who we are. So when we were going through fertility things and it was, not really going the way we wanted, we were like, you know what? Maybe it's in the cards. We're supposed to start the adoption process sooner. So we started researching and getting the home study, because once you have your home study and you're kind of on a list. But here's the thing: everyone thinks there's like a list, and then as babies come available, it's like you start from number one and it doesn't work like that at all.
Yeah. So what's some of the red tape? I mean, we're used to working with like corporations, big corporate. So I would imagine there's a lot of
red tape. Yeah. So basically you have to decide first if you want to do domestic or international.
Okay.
We were open to either. We always said any race, any gender, not specific. If you start to get really, really specific, there's different routes. You know, you're like, I want a girl and it needs to be blonde hair, blue eyes because I want to look like me or whatever. And we didn't have any of that. But we found once we did our research that domestic adoptions happen faster than international. So we were like, okay, we'll start with domestic. But now kind of in hindsight, both of them have pros and cons. Domestically, you can get a child sooner. But in the States, the birth mom has all the rights in the world. Like, unbelievable. Where typically if you do international, they're in orphanages, and so there's different red tape, but it's not the moms can change her mind.
The parents might be long gone anyway.
They're mostly orphanages, so you'll never meet the parents.
Exactly.
Here in the States, the majority of the time, the birth mother or the parents pick the adopted family.
Now, so we're in California. Is it a federal thing, or is it different in Oregon or California?
It's different in every state. In fact, California has the most lenient laws. I don't want to say lenient. The most protected, I guess, for the birth mom.
Favoring the mother.
Oh, yeah. For any reason whatsoever, a mother cannot relinquish her child until the mother, is discharged from the hospital. Okay. So even if she's like, oh, I really like you and Tony, when this baby comes, it's yours in 6 months or whatever, you start helping to pay their bills and stuff like that, and there's no guarantees. She cannot relinquish until she's out of the hospital. So
she could pull out at any time.
Anytime.
So I would imagine
you don't get a penny back.
So how many women out there, again, thinking on the scam side, that say, oh, we want to adopt, let's find some sugar parents to come and pay for...
Well, I mean, we went through several before we got...
Did you really?
Oh, yeah.
So, again, from an emotional...
we spent lots and lots of money and never had a child. And then this one that came about was actually a different experience. It was through basically a friend of a friend of a friend. It wasn't even with an agency that it ended up happening, a private adoption.
I guess
so we had basically three
close calls.
Just this year alone. The first one was in January. Mm-hmm. Basically, we were in a hospital taking care of a boy, for 5 days while the mom was in the hospital. She was like, I don't want it. And then right when it came time to sign, she's like, I changed my mind. And we were devastated. But what I was going to say, in the state of California, even if she had signed and it was in Sacramento, and we drove back to LA, every birth mom is given 30 days in California to change her mind for any reason.
Oh, you're kidding.
Any reason, unless she waives her right. Yeah. And most of the time they don't, because they have a social worker or a lawyer that the adoptive parents pay for. They say it's up to you, but it's your right if you want to sign the waiver, but they actually encourage them not to sign it. So you could be taking care of a baby for 29 days, then get a phone call and say, I want my baby back.
What happens?
No questions asked. You have to give the baby back.
And after 30 days?
Then they lose that right. But where it gets complicated, if you don't have the father's, let's say the mother, and this is sometimes who you're dealing with, they don't know who the father is.
Sure.
So you have the mother's signature, but then all of a sudden the father comes out and goes, that's my baby, and it's over the 30 days. They can contest, and he can try to get the baby.
So you almost, if you're adopting a child, for anybody adopting a child, you almost have to wait, especially in California, you would want to wait until after that 30 days to announce, hey, we have a baby.
And
now.
It's hard because you're excited. So
exactly. So did you wait 30 days with Juliet?
Well, the thing is, because Juliet was born in Ohio, so technically their law is 48 hours, not 30 days. But because we live in California, they did give our birth mom, who's wonderful, they gave her the option of having the 30 days, because you have to follow, it's called an ICPC adoption. You have to follow basically the laws of both states. So they said in Ohio, it's only 48 hours. In California, you have 30 days to change your mind. She actually was like, I would never do that to them. She signed it.
Oh, okay.
Thank God. So we didn't have to, we were like, whew.
And then did you guys have anything in place for when the baby is a certain age where she can have contact with the mother?
We do have an open adoption. By my research, 96% of adoptions in the U.S. are open, but open is a huge spectrum. It could mean sending one picture every month. It could mean they actually have a relationship. Wow. So, and even if you get it in writing, it's not binding by law. It's definitely something that has to get worked out between both parents.
How do you like being a mama?
I love it. Everyone that knows me, you've known me for a long time, I'm super hyper. I don't drink coffee. People are like, are you on drugs or caffeine? Like, whatever. It's like, no. I'm just super, super, super hyper. And I don't need that much sleep. And it's just my personality. I have this like nervous energy. But boy, no one could have prepared me for how tired I was. Like, and you hear it's like, oh, moms are tired. I'm like, yeah, that's not me. That's where I was like, man, I'm feeling my age now. And all the like late nights of being at shows and getting on planes and the whole rock star lifestyle, like not getting that much sleep, I thought would have prepared me, but
pales in comparison. We were talking about a little bit earlier, your maternity leave has kind of come to an end if you've gotten back to work. But let's jump into the music thing and go way back to the mid-90s to when you broke into music.
When I was born? Just kidding.
How did you break into the music business?
So I was a student at Arizona State University, getting my degree to become a news journalist. So I was a junior there. And I had a class called Broadcast Sales and Promotion. No textbook, just guest speakers from all aspects of, the media. And one day, a girl came in, and her name was Katie Seidel. And she was young and just a tiny little thing. And she's like, hi, I'm Katie. I work for Reprise Records. She goes, I'm what's called an LA local. And she described what her job was. And she was the local rep for Sire. So a local is like at labels to do promotion. There are usually nationals that specialize in one format. Maybe it's pop, maybe it's rock, alternative, hot AC or whatever. And then a local does all formats but has a smaller territory, like an LA local is a regional. It's mostly like a regional. So not only was I was like, what is that? She said she worked for Sire. And at the time, my favorite bands were on Sire. It was Depeche Mode and the Smiths. So I thought, oh my God, like that girl's the coolest job. Like I didn't know what radio promotion was. So as she sat there describing it, I'm like, my mouth just dropped open. I was like,
that's what I want to do.
That's what I want to do. I love music, always have. My mom did. Can't sing, like no talent whatsoever, like zero, horrible. So I walked up to her after class. I introduced myself and I was like, how do I get a job like that? Which, I mean, you probably get asked stuff. How do you get into radio? And like, people are like, how did you get that job? Did you go to school? And I remember her saying, I go, do I need to change my degree? And she goes, oh, honey, most people in the music business, she's like, they don't even have degrees, especially back then. Yeah. And I was like, really? And she goes, I go, well, I'm on scholarship. She's like, well, no, stay in. She goes, but basically, she's like, here's my advice. You're going to have to move to New York or LA. While you're still going to school, she goes, try to get a job at a local radio station. It's going to be completely different than working at a label, but at least you'll have some sort of experience. And then, you better plan to, move to LA or New York. I ended up working for KKFR, which was Power 92. It used to be a rhythm station. It had recently, I guess, I don't know, before I worked there, about 6 or 7 months before, had gone to like a mainstream top 40. The Edge, which was the only alternative station there, had just signed on. I don't know. They were still like, the station was in a trailer, like a mobile home. And they had like 3 employees and I wanted to work there. But they're like, we're not even close to hiring or have interns or whatever. Cause that's what I wanted to do. But so I ended up walking in, it was a cluster and I got hired to do, promotion. So promotion at a radio station in the promotion department is completely different from promotion at a
record label.
You really are basically like you're like liaison for the artist that you're representing as part of the label and the radio station, which is the client. So you have to be very good at
politics.
Making everybody happy. Yes. Yeah, if ever the band is mad about something, like they're doing an interview and it's like the band's not happy, you don't want the radio station to know. Like you have to make sure everybody's happy.
Yeah.
And then, and
that's very difficult to do.
That's very difficult to do, especially when, you go on the road and there's bands that are like, what do you do exactly? Like, it seems like you just go on the road with us and then you take people out to dinner and bring them to our show. I'm like, yeah, that's the like tiny part of the job. I was like, let me show you my BDS report. And they're like, what is that? Like 200 pages of paper, like every day I'm like going through looking at real-time spins and they're like, oh, that looks exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's as glamorous as you think. It's like, oh, you're on the radio, you get to go to shows, you get to interview artists. Again, that's about that much.
The fun part on social media.
Do you see me scheduling, 365 days, 24/7 of music and going to meetings and reports, all that stuff. And that's true with any job.
Totally.
The question that I want to get to is over the last, 10 or 15 years, as small to mid-sized labels have become more established and maybe even becoming more of the norm, as we're down to only, 3 majors now? And so you have hundreds of artists under those two big umbrellas. Sure. But at any given time, there might only be 2 or 3 artists that are getting the attention. And I think that's one of the things priorities. So, and I'm kind of talking for you, but basically what happens for you in the promotions department is that on a weekly or maybe even more regularly basis, there will be directives that say, okay, this week we're going to focus Airborne Toxic Event. Next week, oh, wait, you know what? This just came on. We're going to focus this, the Killers.
Well, sometimes it's not. Sometimes something leads it to like it maybe not just be a bigger name or whatever, but let's say you're working something, but then there's literally a record that, I don't know, you think, it's kind of on the back burner right now and it's going to be front and center priority in, 3 months, but all of a sudden it gets a huge sync or a huge ad at a radio station. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my, we got to speed that process up. Like you could just be out setting up a record. And, example is the Killers. We had signed the Killers. I had a 4-song EP from like Lizard King, which was like an import.
I remember that. Yeah.
And I remember the plan was for the record, I think, to drop the single maybe like in May or something. So I was on the road in March setting up this brand new band called the Killers, which I personally loved because it kind of sounded English, even though they're from Vegas. And I, one of the first stations I played it for, I walked it in to play it. I wasn't even there to play it for K-Rock. Actually, I went in to play something else, and the program director said, okay, this is great, this priority, this pretty, but it's like, what do you really like right now?
Yeah.
And I was like, well, actually, we just signed this band. I mean, it's really early, but I was like, it's my favorite thing. I'm like, you'll probably hate it, but I think it's so great. It's like totally like Duran Duran was like my, I love Duran Duran when I was like a young girl. I was like, it's kind of has an 80s throwback feel. And I played it. He listened to it. He listened to it a second time. He called in, and I think the APD, the music director at the time, on third listen, he's like, we're putting this on the air right now. Walked in.
Yeah, that never
Tammy
happens.
Heidi was on the air like midday. Put on the air, and I was like, wait, I don't want to get in trouble. I had to call Julie Greenwald, who was our president Island at the time, and I was like, I hope I don't get in trouble, but K-Rock wants to play. I don't even know if that's our single. Like,
is that a master mix? What?
Right. I was like, oh no, am I going to get in trouble? And she's like, are you kidding? That's the fucking greatest news ever. And it kind of, whatever my priority was at the time, obviously I don't even remember. Suddenly it was the Killers.
But back to the radio thing. I mean, you were saying that 120 some odd.
Yeah, I think when I first started a label, there was like 120 something alternative stations.
And I think we're down to like 60-ish.
It's like published. I don't know. It's in the low 60s. Wow.
So you have all of these like big chunks happening over like short periods of time to the point that we're at now. How has that changed for the artists? I mean, I think we also have more artists now than ever too, because 20 years ago you had garage bands, but you didn't have like bands using garage band in their bedroom to make an album.
So it's harder because, I mean, alternative is one of the slowest formats. Right? They play less currents.
Incubates music longer.
Yes, than a lot of the other formats. So as a radio person, it's harder. There's that many. It's going to take that much longer to get a record up the chart, which ultimately, like, you know, that's a job of a promotion person. That's our report card. You know, and that we really started to see that within the last 5 years, how much longer it took to get a top 10 record.
But going back to some of the other differences, when you were working something back in the day and there was all those stations, and we were talking about spins, what was alternative stations in the mid-90s? What was like a typical alternative rock station spinning a power in the mid-90s versus now a typical station in power, and power is like a song that gets played, the ones that everybody bitches about that get played every 2 hours.
They play the same song over
okay,
and
I've
over.
heard Little Lion Man enough now. Let's move on.
Yeah.
Okay, Radioactive, we get it.
So back in the 90s, the gold category for alternative was everything from the 80s. Depeche Mode, The Cure, Modern English, all those 80 hits was gold. And then in the 90s, so the ratio of currents to gold was about 70% to 30%. So a 70% current based radio station, they probably had, I think most stations had around almost 50 things on their current playlist.
Oh, that's okay.
Between 40 and 50. Now the average is about 25.
So I think that the number of currents that get played is in direct correlation to the number of songs that are hits that people want to hear.
And we saw within the last year, I mean, last year was a big year that prior to like kind of the pop thing like exploding, the current, again, going to that ratio was more like, I'd say 30 to 35% current and the rest was gold for a while. Like I remember working, this is only, I don't know, 6 or 7 years ago, I was like, God, can the 90s stuff go away? Everyone got rid, all the 80s music went to the modern AC or the hot AC or like an H2 station. And so then the 90s became the gold, and every station I would ask, they were like, we do auditorium tests, we do all this testing. I'm like, people still want to hear that not much Nirvana? Like, really? Like, I love Nirvana, but really? Like,
I know.
They don't want to hear new music. They still want to hear the stuff from the 90s. That finally kind of went away in the last like 2 years. But
I still hear.
So they started playing more currents. So back in the 90s, we got off track, but it was easier because there was more currents to play. People spun records faster. You could get call out after like 150 spins where now everything, and things had a faster cycle, kind of like how rhythm, I feel like, and pop is now, they have a song has a shorter like cycle because they're constantly, they play something.
It burns out quicker.
It burns out. That's
the burn is a lot quicker. And I think the burn's a lot quicker. Look at like, some of the other phenomenon that's happened at alternative is that it's incubating songs for pop. So you look at Lorde and Imagine Dragons and Macklemore and some of these more popular, Mumford of Monsters and Men, all these artists that would go on to be on hot AC and pop stations. That so you in a market like LA, you could drop
5 stations.
Yeah, honestly,
and I know from going like this,
from punching all the time, and people tell me that all the time. They'll be like, "Oh God, I heard the same song on K-Rock 98.7 and my today." Over the course of 5 minutes, Kiss
because
and
Jack
Amp.
started playing more. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, there could be 5 or 6 stations.
But here's the thing, and from a label
and that
perspective,
increases the burn. That increases the burn.
It definitely increases the burn. And this is where it got really tricky, especially political, because alternative doesn't want the stations. They want to be the only ones playing the record. But from a label side, what we'd found, it's so much harder to break a song, break an artist, sell singles, sell albums, whatever, break an artist, because the audience numbers outside, it just aren't there just at alternative alone. A lot of times, there's obviously examples that this isn't the case, but majority of the time, it almost has to cross to get that big audience reach.
I mean, Neon Trees? What do you think?
Neon Trees. That's another example.
They kind of ride the fence.
They kind of ride the fence, and sort of the difference with Neon Trees as opposed to, I'd say, Fall Out Boy is we were never able, and I say we because I was responsible to the label, was never really able to get more than one single per album. So the first single, Animal, went number 1 at like 3 formats.
Yes.
And sold a great number of records. We could, a top 10 song.
What is Animal at now, sales wise? Do you know?
Gosh.
Gotta be like 10 million.
I don't
Yeah,
know.
yeah.
I was going to say at least, I'm sure 5 million. I don't even know.
Yeah.
But
I would think if it went 3 formats.
but even with as huge as Animal was, the next single, we could only get top 10, and then it didn't really cross. And then the next record, Everybody Talks, there was a lot of alternative that thought, oh God, this song is way too pop. It's a little, cheesy, sugary or whatever. Ended up taking a lot longer. And just when we were like, it's not calling out, it's researching with females, but not males. I remember. And everyone's like, oh, that's because they're a pop band. And then that song was on that commercial, the Chiron for the Buick Verano or whatever.
Where they're in the bus.
The band's in the bus.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden, boom, it clicked at alternative. Hot AC went to pop, ended up being another number 1 song.
Yeah.
Like huge.
And that's that perfect storm that everybody talks about. Yeah.
Totally. For them, the difficulty, I think, was not being able to get them more established for album sales, because we needed to get more than 1 single, per album. So I think what's interesting, I'm not helping with this record, but we were just talking about Imagine Dragons, who obviously, was it a year ago or 2 years ago? One of the
3 years ago.
Biggest stories. I mean, huge how that broke, right? Yeah. They opened for Neon Trees at South by Southwest years ago.
Oh yeah, they were.
I mean, and I was like, I don't know, it's not really there. So
they were in the LA and Vegas scene forever.
Oh yeah, forever. So now this first single, what do you think of the new single? It doesn't sound like it came off the last record.
No, but it sounds like it's made for. Again, I love these guys. I love what they do.
Me too.
But I think that it's kind of that classic second album after a massive debut.
Right.
Where they are making a record for an audience they already have in mind.
Yep.
They're making a record with radio in mind, with syncs in mind,
Yep.
with touring in mind. So it's a big song. It's a singable hook.
Do you think alternative should be like, oh, they've already been played on so many formats, we shouldn't play Imagine Dragons?
But I think you're right. I think it goes back to the song.
Because I think some people are saying that, and I was like, what? Are you kidding? It's Imagine Dragons. Of course you have to play it. And I think it's a good song. You usually get the benefit of the doubt on the first single.
Yeah.
First single, and then you kind of see what happens. Yeah. So that surprised me. And the record's doing great.
It's
and
doing
fine.
Where is it right now? I don't even.
It's definitely top 10. It's almost top 5. But I think normally I would have thought that would go. It would have just been like a no-brainer. But it was almost, for a minute, I was like, why is this song not a no-brainer? It was a no-brainer for a lot of people, but it was a little. So I go, oh my gosh, that's crazy considering as huge as it just was,
right.
in my opinion. So I think again, it can go back to what people think of the song. And then somebody else said to me in radio about that song, they're like, I know it just doesn't sound like anything off their last record. And then I bring up an example. I love to use examples. I said, I'll tell you something. I'm not even working Imagine Dragons, or I have no tie to them whatsoever. But I said, when we set up after The Killer's Hot Fuss was freaking massive, and we came out with When You Were Young, didn't sound, it had this Americana, Bruce Springsteen sound, and stations that were highly supportive. I mean, some stations played 5 or 6 singles off of Hot Fuss. So I'm thinking, all right, I know it sounds a little different, but there's never an automatic. Obviously, they came off of one of the biggest records, and it was like, why did they go that direction? It ended up being the highest charting song they've ever had in the States, When You Were Young. And even though it sounded different, so I brought that up to people. I was like, don't be so harsh on Imagine Dragons. He's like, whoa, it doesn't sound like Radioactive. It's like,
tell us about how someone can harness this brilliance of Chia. Would you have a name for your new company or what you're doing?
My husband came up with it.
Oh, Tony, the
Tony,
creative.
He is the creative. Candyland, because I literally eat candy every day. It's terrible. I mean, my own dentist is like, there's no way, because I haven't had a cavity since I was in 4th grade. But I honestly eat candy every day. So it's Candyland promotion and marketing. And it's sort of, I didn't mean to start it. It was, taking care of the baby. And then, because when I first lost my job, I had a lot of people calling like, oh my gosh, like you're a vet, you're going to get a job in no time. Like anyone would be lucky to have you, so nice.
By the way, just real quick about that. A lot of people say you haven't worked in radio or records until you've been fired or laid off or something. That was the first time.
No, that was the second time.
Second time you've been, okay.
Yeah, because of downside, like whatever.
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
Like, I know
it
had nothing to do with me.
Oh, of course not. Yeah. Things have been incredible.
Crazily, because I still had a little time on my contract. So not only, let's say the baby didn't come along, not only did I, lose my job, I couldn't, I had a non-compete. I couldn't take another job.
You couldn't even get one. Yeah, if you wanted to.
Couldn't take another job unless I wanted to give up my severance of 13 years. I'm like, are you kidding? I worked my ass off for that.
How long did you get
not
severance
a chance.
For?
Like 6 months.
That's good.
Yeah.
So you this kind of evolved the Candyland.
So involved because so all those calls that happened, then the baby came and everyone's like, gosh, is she going to come back? Is she not going to come back? So a friend, someone, when I first started doing radio promotion, there wasn't that many females at the time.
Yeah, definitely.
And definitely not in the alternative or as like a national. Not regionals. Somebody that I, she did it before me, but we kind of grew up together in the alternative world. Jacqueline Saturn, who was at Sony for 20 something years, is now the GM of a really cool label called Harvest, which is like an incubator label that eventually goes through Capitol. She kept calling me. She's like, how's the baby? When are you going to start
working again?
When are you gonna start working? And I'm like, I can't. I mean, besides the baby, I was just like, contractually, I can't until September or whatever. And she said, the first thing I want you to work is this artist, and I was like, okay, send me music. And so it was this Banks. And she's like, I'm like, wow, it's so great. I love this. And she goes, promise me it's gonna be the first thing you work. So after a week, basically, I'm still friends with people on Facebook and social media, but like I haven't been calling radio stations for, I don't know, it was like 4 some months. Because I was taking care of Juliet. Started calling radio stations like, hey, they're like, oh my God, who got fired? Whose job did you take? I'm like, I didn't take anybody's job.
I got my own, bitch.
I was like, I just got hired to help with this. But they're like, oh, like it was almost like, really? That's it? Like, I swear I thought you were going to call with some big job. And I was like, no, this is so great. And once kind of word got out that I was back, I started getting tons of phone calls from indie labels, major labels, managers saying, can you help me with this record?
Do you think that the position of a promotions person for radio will always exist? Or do you think it's one of those, because I can look at radio and say that even when I started in the late 90s, there's certain, there's no 8 tracks anymore. There's certain things that are non-existent where there used to be people doing jobs that are now automated. But I think that there's also some of those personality gigs that have to stick around. I feel like you're a valuable commodity in that there aren't a lot of young 20-somethings coming up in promotions. There aren't as many jobs.
There's not as many jobs.
The pool is a lot smaller than it used to be.
And the learning curve is a lot shorter. It's like you get thrown in and say, you better become best friends with these radios. You got to show that you can make stuff happen like really soon. It's a short learning curve now. So I think, yes, it is a big personality thing. So I do think, promotion people will need to exist, for a long time still. But what I've seen in the trend now is a lot of management companies want their own in-house radio person. They don't want to have to go through the label. They want to have their own person that, I've
heard that more and more. Small labels are saying,
kind of to me like we're I've probably had more calls from management companies. Like, and in that direction, Q Prime was one of the first ones to do it. Crush Management has a radio person now. And I do think that is a job for the less and less maybe label jobs there are, even though I still think promotion will be there for a while. I see people going into, and into the management side. I think that's where a lot of the future things will be going. So whether they stay on with a major label. It's nice to have an in-house person, of course. And the thing about radio, like I've learned from, there's people, it's like, it's not rocket science, but if you don't understand it, it's like, it is a big mystery. Like
That's true.
like, cause you can do the talk of like, hey, like if you named a record that I've never heard of, right? Or I know nothing about, and I can hear a record and go, oh yeah. So I could probably get this station, like you can kind of BS your way, whatever, through anything if like you're a decent promotion person. But so they want to know like what the real is, but it's a mystery. If you start talking all this language, everyone's like, what are you talking about? It just becomes in your blood. I mean, I've been doing it this long. My parents still don't understand what I do. They're like, I thought the DJs just play whatever they want. Like they still can't understand. Like, I don't get it. Like
People
what you do? They
and
have
it's
no
amazing.
idea.
Even artists don't understand
They don't.
that DJs haven't selected their own music unless you're an NPR, KCRW type. You have a show. I mean, probably 20 years, 30 years.
I mean,
I don't even know.
Yeah.
I mean,
I don't even know.
It's
a long time.
It's
probably even longer than that.
And the other thing too, and as a promotions person too, that even looking at, so if you look at those 60 alternative radio stations that we currently have in the country, in America, there's probably maybe half that really matter. Like there's probably only 20 to 30 people.
They all matter.
No, I'm sorry. You know what I mean? There's
Yeah.
probably 20 to 30 people that really influence what's played. I think that
That's true.
because you know how it works. If you get this station, this station, this station, this station, the rest will fall.
Well, because there tends to be leaders and followers, and I think
it's half and half. I think that because I know a lot of programmers that just fucking follow. They'll look, what's KNRK doing? What's KBZT doing?
But I think for bands, even if it's a, I don't want to say a station that doesn't, but even if it's a smaller station that doesn't have this big reach, it isn't this famous station or whatever. If you get support at that station, and because of that, even one station or 5 stations, the first time you play the market, you have 20 people at your show. And the second time you go, because that station, whatever it is, plays your record.
People,
now there's 200 people. Like, to me, that's why they do matter. It matters more, I think, especially to the band. I mean, those, as long as you can, if you get some, it's people getting to hear your music. And then again, we talked about those bands that have never had a radio song that can still, to me, if your sales go up single wise and ticket sales, like that's a win. You may not really help my audience number or whatever, but that's why
every little bit helps.
Every little bit helps.
It's every show a band plays, they garner new fans.
And on a chart, one spin at a Los Angeles radio station is exactly equivalent to one spin in
Albany. Yeah.
Or name it, Santa Barbara, whatever, a tiny market. It's exactly the same, which a lot of people have said there should be like a weighted chart. Yeah.
So how can people get a hold of Christine Chiappetta at Candyland Promotions?
I must have a Candyland email, but I always just use my my West Coast Chia
at Gmail.
At gmail.com. Mm-hmm. That's also Instagram and Twitter.
Christine Chiappetta. Chia, thank you so much.
Thank you, Darren.
This was awesome.
That was super fun.
Yeah.
I'm glad we got to catch up, too.
Yeah, we caught up. We talked about all things music. And check her out, West Coast Chia at Gmail, if you want to hire her services or find her on Instagram, Twitter, all that good stuff. DarrenRoseRadio.com and at Darren Rose is where you can find me on all my social networks. Thanks for checking out the show.